coming up.
Those requirements are not set in
Correct.
regulations.
Okay, so did the government provide you with direction to not pursue a formal regulatory framework for interchange fees being capped at a certain level?
With competition in financial services, and particularly in fees that are gouging consumers. So are you telling me that the minister and the department have never looked into this anti-competitive behavior by Interact that gives preferential treatment to the co-chairs of the board and treats everybody else differently and gouges them at a 98% margin difference?
So
there's no true competition. If there was, there would be aggressive rate reductions happening. So why is the government of Canada's policy not seeking to get those rates, to get that competitive nature restored, where we see that rate reduction happening, so that consumers and business get a better outcome here?
I mean, it's a good question.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Pleased to welcome from witnesses today Louisa Rizzo, Director General, GST HST Ruling Directorate at Canada Revenue Agency, from the Ministry Department of Finance. Big delegation, Judith Hamel, Nicolas Marion, Senior Director, Payments, Amanda Riddell, Director, Real Property and Financial Institutions, Sales Tax Division. We also have Warren Light, Expert Advisor, Sales Tax Division. Welcome. And lastly, from Statistics Canada, Matthew McDonald, Director, Consumer Prices Division. Matthew Hoffarth, Assistant Director, National Economic Accounts Division. And Jennifer Withington, Assistant Chief Statistician, Economic Statistics. So welcome to the Industry and Technology Committee, and for participating in this exercise.
Mr. Marion, there's a news story this morning that talks about how the Toronto Dominion Bank had to pay a $6.5 million fine for the word that the article uses is cheating thousands of credit card companies for decades, or customers for decades. And the article talks about the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada and sort of that it might be a little bit weak. I'm just wondering if your department has undertaken any sort of review or provided any advice to the government about strengthening regulatory oversight in these areas, particularly through mandate reviews at the Bank of Canada, OSFI, or the FCAC.
If that's okay, I will answer that question.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, as you know, as public servants, we won't be talking about the advice we provide to the government. So, but we are, like, the department is always looking at ways to strengthen the financial sector system, its stability, its security.
Have you undertaken any sort of like landscape review of the adequacy of the regulatory frameworks?
There's actually, in the summer, was launched a legislative review of the financial sector.
Okay.
And the consultation period just ended in September, and the department is currently reviewing the submissions.
Would you be able to provide the committee with interim documents or a summary of this, given the nature of this study that we're looking at right now?
Not at the moment.
Why?
Like, as I said, like the consultation period closed fairly recently, and the department is still in the process of reviewing the submissions.
Could you provide us with a summary? Why not? There's many of you at the table. So you're saying your department can't provide a parliamentary committee with the undertakings of a legislative review?
We can provide a summary of we could share the documents for the
Perfect.
legislative review.
So any of the findings you will table with this committee?
Like, we're still in the process of...
Yes, but I just want the documents so I can read them as a legislator and provide recommendations to the government.
We need to go the documents. Some of them have been...
Okay, this is ridiculous.
Some of them we can not share because consultation documents...
We'll do a production of documents. This is ridiculous. Okay. Mr. Marion, the European Union has regulation that limits interchange fees from 0.3% for consumer credit cards and 0.2% for consumer debit cards. Did you provide advice to the government that Canada should undertake similar regulations?
I mean, we, in our work, particularly that led to the recent agreements with Visa and MasterCard that saw the reduction of interchange fees for small
But that's
businesses.
a voluntary agreement, right?
It is a voluntary agreement.
So did you
Having
provide-
said that, I'd qualify it as a non-regulatory agreement. It
Right.
is an agreement, and they adhere to the agreement. They post
Did
the
the government
fees.
provide direction to your department to not pursue a regulatory framework on interchange fees and a voluntary framework instead?
So we've had a number of these agreements, 3 sets of these agreements over the years. The first set was negotiated in 2014 and brought into force
But
in
there's no formal
2015.
regulatory framework, correct?
Those requirements are not set in
Correct.
regulations.
Okay, so
correct.
did the government provide you with direction to not pursue a formal regulatory framework for interchange fees being capped at a certain level?
We didn't receive any direction saying
Thank you.
that it shouldn't be done
Thank you.
regulatorily.
Did the government provide you any direction on ensuring or regulating or working something into the voluntary framework that you talked about, the voluntary agreement with Visa and MasterCard, to ensure that the savings from interchange fees would be passed on to small businesses when a payment processor is involved?
So just to be clear here, at the time of the fall economic statement in 2022, the government announced its intention, one, to negotiate.
So I'm running out of time, so I want to
appreciate
know.
that, but at the time, the draft legislation was tabled concurrently with the announcement, and the announcement said, if we cannot achieve this through agreement, we will proceed with regulating this in
But I'm
short
asking,
term.
particularly with regard to the payment processors like Stripe,
Right.
has the government provided you with direction to ensure that the savings on interchange fees from the deal with Visa and MasterCard are actually passed down to consumers and not hoarded by payment processors?
Right. So most merchants that are on Interchange Plus plans are de facto receiving.
But we don't know how many.
Rec-
We don't know how many of those. Like you get that talking point, but we don't actually know how many of those clients are on Interchange Plus or not. So I'm asking why didn't the government, if that was to go to small businesses, did you provide advice to the government to ensure that those savings were not hoarded by payment processors like Stripe?
We have communicated in very clear terms.
Could you table that communication with the
The-
committee? Anything written to the payment processors?
So we've spoken with the payment processors that our expectation was for any rate
Did you do that with
reductions.
Stripe?
We did.
Can you table
Absolutely.
that? Last week, you said.
No, I said absolutely.
Okay, so you can table any emails that you've had with them.
So it was done through verbal discussion, but at the same time,
When?
we communicated that certainly in July of this year, and I'd have to go back.
With who from the company?
With Stripe.
With who?
Brian Peters, I believe, is the gentleman's name.
Interesting. Last question that I have, and perhaps it's for Mr. Light. Payment processors are citing the increase in GST, HST, the change in ruling I will get into, you know what we're talking about, on certain fees as the reason why they can't or aren't passing the savings from the interchange fees and Visa and MasterCard along to consumers. Were you lobbied by payment? Like, did you hear a lot of feedback from payment processors that they didn't want that change to GST, HST made? Like, was that a lobbying effort within the department on the behalf of payment processors to have GST applied to the fees? There was a court ruling, and then I believe that there was a change in policy, right, to ensure that GST did apply. Was that something that was like heavily lobbied in your department by payment processors?
No, we did not. The lobbying point out that the tax also applied up until a 2020 court ruling. In 2023, we made an amendment to ensure that the tax reapplied.
Right.
So, but no, we did not see. We did receive some communication from acquirers asking for information, but we did not receive heavy lobbying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Garner.
What happens when there is one or more bad apples in the industry who don't follow? Specifically, let's talk about Stripe here. Stripe said that it is not going to pass on the benefits. So what do we have in our power to manage Stripe also follows the conduct that is being followed by its peers? Mr. Nicholas Marion, if you can answer that, specifically to that, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's I think part of the government's responsibility, and that's seen in the code of conduct, is one, making sure that merchants can make informed decision at the time that they sign a contract with
Mr. Marion, unfortunately, my time is limited. So is there any mechanism available to take action against the major players who don't follow this?
So again, our expectation is that any interchange rate reductions will be passed. Having said that, I'm fully aware of this situation.
No,
I'd like to start off where MP Rempel Garner ended her round of questioning with regard to the interchange fees and the tax case, that the claim by Stripe that somehow they're uniquely hurt by the GST, HST change, which isn't really a change as I understand it. So maybe we could tackle that part first. The GST being applied this year isn't new, is it? It was just, they got a 12-month reprieve essentially, but they're paying what they were paying before.
Yeah, there's been no change. This is a longstanding policy that's been in place since the GST was introduced in 1991. It was well understood. Banks are often ambitious when it comes to challenging laws, and they took a swing at it. They lost at the tax court. They won at the Federal Court of Canada, or the Federal Court of Appeal. We introduced legislation to unwind that decision, which was contrary to longstanding policy, and the tax was reintroduced. So it's not a new tax. It's not a new cost.
It's not a new tax.
No.
And it's not a tax that applies strictly to Stripe, is it?
No, it applies to all acquirers.
It applies to all of them. So far, they're the only company that I'm aware of that has come out and said that they're not going to apply the reduction, although a number of other providers have been silent. Are you aware, is there any other company that is providing these interchange services, these processing services, that is saying they will not pass it on?
I'm not aware of any others.
And what has the department done to reverse their perspective on it?
Well, we've had many conversations. In fact, this was quite a hot topic. If you recall, back in Budget 2023, we had a lot of conversations with industry. We had a lot of conversations with MPs and parliamentarians, and this should be a settled issue by now. So
there can be only one or two reasons why Stripe is refusing to pass it on. Either they're not as good at doing their job as their competitors and don't have as robust a technology that allows them to absorb this, or they're just gouging consumers. Do you have any idea which it is?
Well, I can't speak to Stripe's business practices, but what I would say is that the GST on the network fee is a very, very small cost as a percentage of the cost. So they have many costs they need to absorb. So it could be labor costs, technology costs, you name it. So to blame not passing this on to one small input to their overall costs would seem to us to be a bit disingenuous.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. I'm not sure which finance official to pose this one to, but I want to talk about Interact. You may have been aware that we've had a little chat here around all of these fees of Interact. We had a board member here in committee who didn't seem to know what the pricing was of the company that he is a board member of, which shocks me because every company I've been a board member of, I know what our pricing structure is, so I'm not sure how truthful he was. But in the end of the day, the e-transfer fees range from 6 cents to 43 cents, apparently. And apparently, if you are on the board of Interact, and in particular, if you're a co-chair of Interact, you're one of the two companies, coincidentally, that gets the 6 cents. And if you're not there, you have to pay the 43 cents as provider. So has the department at all looked into the anti-competitive behavior of Interac and the way it treats other financial institutions in the pricing?
Thank you for the question. We do work with Interac. Matters related to competition is one that we defer to the Competition Bureau. And so to the specifics of your question, I think those would be better posed to them.
But when you're forming public policy, and I served 8 years in a minister's office back in a long time ago, and the department's always working with the minister to look at issues, public policy issues, and certainly the Department of Finance and Minister of Finance should be concerned with competition in financial services, and particularly in fees that are gouging consumers. So are you telling me that the minister and the department have never looked into this anti-competitive behavior by Interac that gives preferential treatment to the co-chairs of the board and treats everybody else differently and gouges them at a 98% margin difference?
So we do, again, work with Interac. There are a number of areas of interest with respect to pricing and so on. We haven't entertained agreements in terms of setting certain pricing for Interac. It's not something that stakeholders have raised with us. In fact, merchants that I deal with value.
Do stakeholders have to raise something for you to look at an issue? I mean, the issue here is that if you're being charged $1.50 on each end of the transaction, that's $3. And Royal Bank and TD are paying 6 cents. That's a monstrous amount of profit. And the department hasn't looked into that. And the department hasn't looked into, I also take it, the return on equity percentages on credit card business. I worked at a bank. I know that the bank I worked at, the return on equity was 52% on the credit card business. So their defense of this industry is BS in terms of the fact that generally the return for the entire bank is 10 to 12, 13% is their target. The department doesn't look into any of these issues, doesn't put forward policy to try and correct when you have usury returns on credit cards, or you have usury returns by 2, if not the 4 key banks on charging on Interac. You don't look at those issues at all?
We look at a number of issues, and thank you for the question. With respect to Interac, as I was going to say, merchants do value the services that they provide and want to maintain their access to Interac, whether it's payment receivable through e-transfer or payment expediency through e-transfer, as well as their debit service offerings.
With respect to the letter that would outline the information that we're looking for, and I guess I would ask Ms. Hamill, if the letter is sent to you from the chair of the committee, will your department respond directly to those questions?
Regarding the consultation?
Yes, that's correct.
So maybe just to clarify, the consultation is being led by another division, and I know that they've updated me on the process. I know they're in the process of reviewing the documents that have been received, and many stakeholders have also asked for discussions, so these discussions are ongoing. So my concern was not that much about sharing the results of the consultation, but about the timing in terms of doing it. But we can take that question back and come back to you with what's possible and in what time frame.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just kind of intrigued, Department of Finance here, about what your policy objectives actually are. Like, what are the guidelines, or I guess what are the guardrails that you guys have in place for your department on setting your policy? Like, when you compare what's going on in like the European Union, some other countries like that, they've been very aggressive on setting rate cuts and setting levels. They're way down here and we're way up here. Why is that?
Thank you for the question. I take it that you're referring to the interchange rates in this particular case.
Yeah.
Right. And so for Canada, the latest round of agreements to secure reductions in interchange rates for small businesses. We're really looking at how can we reduce meaningfully the interchange rates paid by small businesses, number one. Number two, let's make sure that those reductions aren't accompanying increases for other businesses. And number three, we wanted to make sure that consumers, Canadians, reward programs were protected, as they value those programs quite significantly. And so those were some of the objectives of going into the agreements. And then it's how do we want to structure this? How best do we deliver on those?
Okay, so I just looking at multiple things that we have heard in this committee so far. We look at the credit card companies, for example. All of their interest rates are virtually identical. Sure, there's multiple players in the market, but there's no true competition. If there was, there would be aggressive rate reductions happening. So why is the Government of Canada's policy not seeking to get those rates, to get that competitive nature restored, where we see that rate reduction happening, so that consumers and business get a better outcome here?
I mean, it's a good question in terms of what we're observing in terms of interest rates, for instance, and I can attest that there is quite significant amount of competition in terms.
Well, not really. It's not really, because they're all the exact same.
In terms of the agree that they're all the same, and I'd also mention that the gas prices in my neighborhood are all the same as well. But they compete fiercely with one another.
Well, if they did, their rates would be way lower.
Actually, they don't, because of vertical integration in the market.
But they do compete fiercely on their credit card portfolios.
Yeah, I mean, like the rewards are the exact same too. They all offer generally the same thing. In fact, multiple banks offer the exact same company as the beneficiary of the rewards, like Aeroplan or Avion or all these different things. But anyways, Mr. Chair, I just want to take the last couple of minutes here. I have a motion I would just like to move. It's in relation to the study that we are doing, so it's within scope here. So that this is the motion here, that in relation to the committee's ongoing study of credit card practices, and given various departments have refused to answer questions and produce documentation related to the committee's ongoing study, the committee therefore order the department to produce A, Honourable Michelle Rempel-Garner's request for any briefing notes and summary documents prepared by the department related to the Government of Canada's consultation process on reducing interchange fees, including any and all written submissions received by stakeholders. B, MP Jean-Denis Guérin's request for all copies of Visa and MasterCard's initial offer to reduce interchange fees, including any and all counteroffers by the department, as well as any and all email exchanges related to these negotiations between Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. C, MP Brian Massey's request for any advice letters or memorandums provided to the Minister on the matter of reducing interchange fees or credit card reductions more broadly, and that these documents be produced to the committee within 14 days following the adoption of this motion, unredacted and in both official languages. Thank you.
Sure, what the rationale for a motion is, but I know that the witnesses, when asked by me for exactly the same information here, committed to providing it to the committee. So I feel that there's a bit of a breakdown here in terms of what happened at this committee, that maybe members were too busy writing a motion rather than paying attention to the testimony that was given. But the witnesses here, Ms. Hamill in particular, committed to providing this information, all of which is similar to the motion. And so it's a process. It's not, we don't usually jump to, say you have to do this without going through the previous steps. And when we have witnesses that are sitting here that are saying, yes, we will provide the information, that to me is just an abuse of our parliamentary power. So that's my first argument. My second point that I want to make is Mr. Massey, on the record, had said that he was not asking for cabinet confidence advice to ministers. So that's exactly what is requested in this motion. So if Mr. Massey is supporting this motion, but he said on the record that he doesn't.
Mr. Turnbull, on a point of order?
I just want to make sure that as the parliamentary secretary wraps himself around the public service flag, to remind him that they also blocked whistleblower legislation for public servants, refused pay equity, made racialized workers go to the Supreme Court to actually have their proof and cases proved.
Yeah, Mr. Massey, I'm not sure that's a point of order.
Okay.
So sounds more like a point of debate, but on that note, colleagues, we're nearing the end. It's 10:14.
Cabinet memorandum.
So, Mr. Perkins, you don't have you don't have the floor, Mr. Perkins. I have the floor, and I'm the chair. This is the end of this committee.